Alright, here I am mixing up the starter. I have taken the old starter out of the fridge, and now I pour in some water. And put in some flour and mix that together. So in this video I'm taking you through creating sourdough bread. This is a bunch of videos I had made a while ago. Also here I'm just sort of continuing to mix it until I get the right consistency for the starter. Now I'm going to leave it out at room temperature for maybe 8 hours to get it woken up. This is the next stage of making the sourdough bread. In this case, I'm mixing all of the ingredients together. So I'm starting off by putting in the water. Just filling up. Yeah. So as I was saying earlier, in this video, I'm walking you through the process of making sourdough bread, and it's just a quick timeline of the process. I go a little bit slower here in order to make everything clear, but this is the general process I would use for making sourdough bread. Go to my website, kneadsourdoughbread.com, if you want to get the recipe for this. But yeah, when I mix the ingredients together, first off, I'm adding all of the water. Next, I pour in the sourdough starter, or at least get about a quarter cup of it. This amount is not doesn't need to be exact. Now I'm adding the salt. Now I add in the flour with this recipe. We have it worked out, so you use 5 pounds of flour. This is because it's easier to sort flour by weight as opposed to volume, because it can really change its density. So I'm just pouring it out of the bag because I know I'm going to mix in the whole bag, or I may stop a little bit short if the dough has reached the right consistency before all of it has been added. I just pour some in and mix it with a spoon. This is by far the longest step of the process. And as I add in more flour, it becomes it's going to require more and more stirring. But with any bread, you would have to do this same thing. And here, this is all you need to do for this type of sourdough bread. There's no kneading involved. Alright, so here it's getting a little bit more difficult to stir in, but it will get there. And once this is all completed, then I'm going to cover the dough and let it wait for about anywhere from like 8 to 12, or you could do longer hours. A lot of it is going to depend on the consistency of your dough in your own environment. So it's there can be variation in what's required, and also you see. Okay, yeah. So yeah, here just scrape off the spoon to get everything in there. Yeah. So variation in your environment, and also the consistency of your dough, how much starter you're using, and it's not something that's very precise either. It doesn't have to. You don't have to get your waiting time down to the nearest 10 minutes or something. But if you keep an eye on it, you can kind of look for when it reaches the maximum rise and use it at that time. So here, this is showing you the consistency of the dough. As you can see, it's not nearly like regular dough, but it's not completely runny either. So here I've just put the dough off to a place where it can sit. Now we've ended the first rise, so I'm turning on the oven to preheat. And I put the glass pans in the stove because when these are preheated, the dough right at the interface of the pan will just sort of fry or burn immediately, and that way you don't have any sticking problems. So you don't need to grease the pans, but you do need to have them preheated. This also makes it take longer to preheat the oven. So what I just did is I put some water on the counter to prevent sticking, and I showed you the dough, so you can see that it's pretty close to doubled. Now I pour all of the dough out, so you can see that it's pretty fluid. Now I'm just going to scrape off the side of the pan. Just get all of that out. It comes fairly easily, although the parts of that dry, and that's for cleaning, that's the biggest part. So now you want to keep your hands moist and just divide the dough into the number of loaves you want. So in this case it's 4. You can see how I'm moving it, how fluid this is. Then you want to just make sure all the piles are the same volume. And then form them into loaves. And we'll let them do a second rise while the oven is getting up to temp. This is loaf number 2. There, it looks like I've got all the loaves done. Just kind of rinse off the hands. These are my 4 loaves. The shape isn't too important because we'll be putting them into the pan. Alright, so now the oven has gotten up to temp, and I've waited for 10 minutes. So now I take these bread pans are at 450 degrees Fahrenheit, so should be treated very carefully. Just fold that loaf over a couple more times, and you're going to set that in the preheated pan. You can often hear this sizzle while it's being dropped in. Then you take a knife and you cut some slits in the top, and this allows the bread to expand when it's rising. So you have hopefully a single crease along the top rather than cracking occurring all over the top of your loaf. So because it's a little bit awkward fitting or tight fitting 4 pans in the oven, you kind of have to dance around a little bit as you bring them out. So again, you can do this process pretty easily in the morning. You don't have to, once you're into it, you can do it when you're half asleep. You'll notice that I've just woken up in these pictures. So again, I'm going to put that slit in the top. You can see the fluidity of by how the bread is shaking when I am trying to cut it. It's actually a little bit difficult to cut it because the bread is so fluid. So now let's put these loaves in the oven, and it's time to bake. Alright, so now the baking is done. It's time to bring these loaves out of the oven and see about how much they've risen. It may take a little bit of work to get to this stage. That's what it took for me. And usually you can just shake them out. Sometimes you have to use a spatula because there will be some points that have stuck along the side, and you can use a spatula to break the connection between the loaf and the pan at those points. Typically just running a spatula around the outside will get the job done. Here I don't really have any problems. They all came out very easily. This is what you can expect when you get the process down. And the loaves will still have a lot of fluid in them, so you don't want to leave them sitting on the ground so they get all the bottoms get moist. Also, they're hot, so you want to handle them with gloves.